Greetings and welcome to Flanigan's Ecologic. I am your host, Ted Flanigan, and today I am really pleased to have Sam Teicher on the podcast. Sam is the co-founder and currently the Chief Reef Officer for Coral Vita, an innovative reef restoration company. Today we're talking about coral reefs and their importance to the planet, known as the rainforests of the sea. Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me here, Ted.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to. Thanks for taking the time. And where are you located right now? I know your head office is in the Bahamas.
It is. That's where our first coral farm launched and is still running. I am in the tropical wonderland of Brooklyn, New York.
Very good. I knew you were born and raised in D.C., so you shifted north a little bit, and then went. Well, we'll get into it. So I want to talk about the problems, and obviously then we want to get right into the solutions. But before we get into the problems, I've done a little bit of research, but I want you to help out me and our listeners. What exactly is a coral?
So people might have, these images of corals, and maybe they think they're colorful rocks or they're beautiful plants. Corals are actually animals. They're ancient, distant cousins of jellyfish that have plants living inside of them that make rock for their skeleton. So, as someone who grew up on Magic School Bus and that generation of educational cartoons, Bill Nye the Science Guy, it's a pretty cool 3-for-1 for me. And in addition to them being these living animals, they're kind of like underwater city builders. So a coral will grow over time. It's a colonial organism. So if you look at a piece of coral, you're actually looking at hundreds, if not tens of thousands of identical clones of these coral polyps that together form the structure. And then all of those coral colonies together form a reef. And then that reef really can be one of the most not only beautiful, but important habitats in the ocean. So they sort of act like these underwater cities, allowing for all sorts of other life forms to survive and thrive. And so despite taking up less than 1% of the seafloor, coral reefs support 25% of all life in the ocean.
It's just a phenomenal thing. And then I read that there's over 6,000 species of coral.
So you've got hard corals, you've got soft corals and octocorals. There's lots of different types. But yeah, as far as the tropical coral reefs, if you're in the Caribbean, there's about 60 species. If you go out in the Indo-Pacific, there's hundreds. There's different ones in the Red Sea, the Western Indian Ocean. And they're pretty incredible life forms.
And so all the way back to the exoskeleton, I always think of the lobster and the, with its exoskeleton. But these are living organisms. They reproduce asexually, and they sort of form in colonies that just sort of get bigger and bigger.
Asexually and sexually. So
really?
They basically will grow over time naturally, and sort of one polyp makes a clone. It grows into 3, grows into 400, grows into 10,000 over time, depending on the species and the conditions and all that kind of stuff. And we'll get into coral farming a little bit more, but we sort of largely focus on the asexual growth. We'll take cuttings of living corals, just like you take a cutting off of a tree or a flower and graft it. We take cuttings from living corals, grow them asexually for the most part, and then eventually replant them into the ocean. Corals, though, do reproduce. They make babies. It's weird. It's wild. It usually happens for most corals once a year after a full moon. Safe for work videos, if you sort of go on YouTube and check it out, and probably have David Attenborough narrating it in a very soft, seductive voice, but it's pretty wild. It's, again, kind of like pollination. The corals will release eggs and sperm into the water columns, again, for this sort of 45 to 90-minute window once a year, and then make new coral babies. So they're pretty incredible creatures.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the sort of everybody has heard about the Great Barrier Reef, which is on the northern coast of Australia, 2,300 kilometers long. But where else are corals found around the world?
There's about 100 countries and territories where you can find tropical coral reefs. There are cold water corals, so in Norway, Scotland, off the coast of Maine. For Coral Vita, and when people really think about coral reefs, it's more in the tropics, and that's what we focus on. They're in the Western Pacific and the Eastern Pacific, the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, to the Western Indian Ocean, the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, really spanning the whole tropics around the world. The furthest north, I think, coral reefs are found is Japan. They go down to Brazil. Australia, and really play a big role in a lot of places, a lot of communities all around the world.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I guess it's sort of generally, between 30 degrees latitude north and 30 degrees latitude south. That's sort of the bandwidth where there's most of the corals, I take it,
Yeah, inside the tropics, exactly.
inside the tropics. And then let's talk about their benefits. I think you said they're what 1% of the ocean's seafloor, but providing 25% of the marine habitat. That's one of the key benefits.
25% marine life depends on
Marine
them
life.
for habitat, for shelter from predators, for reproduction, working their way up the food chain. So for life in the ocean, they're incredibly important. And also for humanity. So, I've been a diver since I was a kid. First time I saw a coral reef, I was 6. I didn't grow up, in the waters of the Potomac River in DC thinking I was gonna be a coral farmer, but I do have this lifelong love for them, for the reefs in their own right, for sort of the sake of the environment and nature. But really at the end of the day, they are incredibly important for humanity. So it's estimated that there's about 1 billion people around the world that depend on coral reefs, while they also generate $2.7 trillion a year. So if you have a community that relies on those coral reefs for fishing, to feed their families, to pay the bills, all the tourism economies that rely on snorkel and scuba tourists, or even if you just want to put your toes in white sandy beaches, often those white sandy beaches only exist because of coral reefs. They act like natural seawalls. A healthy reef reduces wave energy by 97%. So for storm surge, for erosion, they're taking care of, they're protecting lives and property. And if you know someone that has cancer or arthritis or suffered from a viral infection, which is, I'd say, most of us, there are medicines on the market already that are combating those types of ailments that come from coral reef organisms. We often think about tropical rainforests as being nature's medicine cabinet. It's estimated there are 300 to 400 times more medicinal compound in coral reefs. So all told, again, 25% of marine life, 1 billion people, trillions of dollars a year. Coral reefs are essential for life in the ocean as well as for all of us.
So let's clarify that the rainforest of the sea comment. I guess that's because they're supporting such great biodiversity, and then like rainforests, producing different plants that actually are the basis of medicines today. Is that the genesis of that comment, or the characterization?
Yeah, and then you think of all the beautiful colors and creatures and all these. There's just a lot of things that I think come to mind when we think of rainforests, and then when you think of coral reefs.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they're threatened. I mean, let me just lay out what I've gathered so far. They're threatened by increased water temperatures, by pollution, sedimentation, other forms of human activity. What am I missing there?
Yeah, you got most of the big ones: destructive fishing or overfishing, sort of these local, regional, and global impacts. So yeah, the unfortunate reality, which is why, again, my job exists, which is wild. We have to live in a world where we need coral reef restoration. We need businesses to help scale growing and outplanting coral reefs to regenerate their health. Since the 1970s, we have lost over half of the world's coral reefs. And we are currently on track to lose over 90% by 2050. When I started the company with my friend and classmate Gator Halpern back in 2015, we lost 30% of the world's reefs, and we were on track to lose over 75% by 2050. So just in a decade, things have gotten worse. And that obviously is a tragedy, considering just, again, how incredible and inspiring and miraculous coral reefs are and how important they are for that life in the sea. And then also when we just think about it from a pure socioeconomic perspective, if this ecosystem that 1 billion people rely on and that generates so much value for so many countries and communities disappears, it's a really big problem for us. And so that's what we're facing right now, is the rapid deterioration of coral reefs right in front of our eyes.
Have we already lost trillions of dollars worth of value? I don't mean to put it into just stark economic terms, but I think you said we have, $2.7 trillion worth of value as a result of the coral reefs and all the benefits the fisheries and the tourism and everything else. Have we already lost about that much? It's a huge
I
number.
don't want to give the wrong number. I think it's fair to say we have lost a lot of value.
A lot.
I mean, again, if you think about just the amount of sea life that's disappeared, how harder it is, how much further afield fishermen have to go go, catch their products, that there are people that are choosing, I want to go on a vacation for the holidays, and I want to go diving or snorkeling. The reef's dead. I'm going to go spend my money elsewhere. That's not just the scuba shops that suffer from that. That's the airlines, that's the government, that's the taxi drivers, that's the restaurants. Sure. And who knows, again, what kind of medicines may have, been lost from our grasp that we could have developed if more of that life in the sea was still around. So it's definitely clear that the loss of reefs is happening. It's this, real loss of life, and also a tremendous loss of value.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that climate change is the largest factor, or is that not the case in the loss of this?
It is. I mean, there are
the water
things
temperatures.
Yeah, right. Just like, again, to give an analogy, which I did not invent, but, if it gets too hot for us, white blood cells in our body, we're going to attack ourselves trying to figure out what's wrong, fevers and whatnot. And if you stay too hot in your body for too long, it can cause some serious problems. Corals can live only in this sort of narrow temperature band and get too cold, but more and more and more it gets too hot. The corals rely on this symbiotic algae inside of them. That's the sort of the plants I referred to before. Through photosynthesis, they feed the coral. Corals will basically expel that algae, which is also what gives it the color, exposing the white limestone skeleton of the corals, which is why, for listeners, if you've heard of coral bleaching, that's why it's called coral bleaching. And if the temperatures don't come back quickly enough, usually within several weeks, the corals basically can starve to death. And so that is happening more and more and more. A global bleaching event historically was the equivalent to a 100-year flood, right? So an event should happen once every 100 years. We've had 6 or 7 of them since the late 90s. And the predictions are that we'll have one every other year by the time 2050 comes around. There are other problems. So if we think about the Florida Keys, they had one of the biggest coral reef tracts in the world. Over 95% of the Florida Keys are already dead. Climate change has absolutely made things worse. What was still left was getting hurt, and is getting hurt pretty bad. They, though, also had a big issue with pollution. They had septic systems were basically just washing bad stuff out to sea. So overfishing, pollution, these other factors definitely are harming corals, are playing a big role. But already, and definitely moving forward, warming and acidifying oceans is a huge threat for corals.
Yeah. Let's talk about how you got into this. I know you were born and raised in the DC area. You mentioned the Potomac River. You went to college at Yale, undergrad and grad, and it sounds like you and your buddy Gator Halpern, is it?
Yep.
Had this idea. Talk about how that came about. And I mean, you've created this amazingly positive organization.
Appreciate it. Yeah. So I was more of a policy and sort of NGO person. Gator was more academia, environmental science. So I had an opportunity to intern on climate adaptation policy in the Obama White House. I worked for a coalition of island nation governments on resilience and sustainability. And I also worked for my friend's NGO, Eli Africa, in Mauritius between college and grad school in 2012, 2013. And one of the projects I helped get going there was a United Nations funded coral nursery. So sort of an underwater garden funded by this grant. It was an amazing experience working with local communities, seeing the impact of growing and outplanting corals. It also is pretty clear, though, that model, which is how most restoration projects are done, it's not going to cut it from a pure scaling perspective, right? For those who've not had the joy of applying for a UN grant before, it's a cumbersome process. It was for a very small amount of money that ran out, and that was the end of the project. And the underwater gardens have limitations in terms of species diversity, in terms of toughening up the coral's resilience to warming oceans, to the impracticality of setting up an underwater garden at every reef that needs to be restored. Gator likes to say he felt he was writing the obituary for the planet, doing research in academia. We sort of coalesced in our master's program around, maybe a business could solve better, more effectively, more rapidly for these environmental issues that matter and that matter to us. than those traditional sort of spaces in the conservation world. So we got a $1,000 grant from Yale, which we've taken for quite a ride. We
sure have.
We're working in 6 or 7 different countries around the world. We got over 40 staff members. We've seen really positive impact on the reefs. We've generating millions of dollars a year, proving out that you can sort of do for profit, for nature, for good. And that's that one sort of back porch idea that we had. Is how it all started.
That's really great. I want to talk more about the business model, but when you were starting out, what was the first step? I mean, I've looked at your website. I've seen you cut these little micro fragments off of living coral. You attach them to some sort of I think you called a polyp plug, and then you start putting these plugs. Well, I guess you're growing them in greenhouses now. But how did you start that? I mean, it's one thing going for that idea, which is a great idea. Somebody's got to do something fast and scale it. But how did you start it? What was the $1,000 is not going to buy you a greenhouse or a plane ticket to many places in the world.
It did buy us one round trip ticket. We flew down to Florida to meet with coral scientists and experts. We had enough money for that and to rent a car. But that was about it. So on the drive from Miami south through the Florida Keys, we slept in our car the whole way down. So we've invented our own technologies and processes and done a lot of amazing stuff over the past decade. But from the start, we didn't invent this field of coral farming. There's incredible practitioners all around the world who are doing this kind of stuff: community groups, NGOs, researchers, government initiatives. But what we sort of saw was, again, low tech underwater gardens combined with grant and donation funding model. So we incorporated open source science, some of which was pioneered by our original advisors. So Dr. David Vaughn for microfragmenting, Dr. Ruth Gates and her partners for assisted evolution. So this whole field to try and toughen up corals' resilience to warming oceans. And again, a lot of research groups had sort of shown, okay, land-based coral farming, aquaculture parks, the sort of greenhouses you referred to, are viable, but they were mainly focused on research. So our thought was, let's take science, microfragmenting that lets you grow corals in months and years instead of decades and centuries, assisted evolution, so more resilient, hardier corals. And then instead of the sort of loose network of unwieldy and limited underwater gardens, take the research concept around the aquaculture parks, but basically put like a production-oriented, unit economics-based, almost coral factory approach to that kind of work. So we kind of combined all those ideas together, then drafted a business plan in grad school. We got into Yale's summer accelerator program for student startups, which was $15,000 and mentorship and that kind of stuff. And we stretched that out quite a ways. I worked a part-time job doing green roofing, was living back home with my parents, and then took us about, almost a year, but eventually we got our first investor, and then our second and third, and eventually we were able to raise enough capital to make hires. My background's political science. I love corals, but I'm not a coral scientist. We hired our first coral restoration expert. We were scouting out where was the best place to set up farm number one, and we settled on Freeport, Grand Bahama, and that kind of started snowballing from there. So the first farm we set up, again, 2014 was when we got that grant. 2015 when we graduated. 2018 was when we moved to Grand Bahama, and May 2019 was when we set up farm number one.
And farm number one, I use the term greenhouse. Is it actually an indoor facility, or is it?
It's a mixture. I mean, so we have both around the world. So we're now operating in Saudi Arabia. We had a pilot in Dubai. We're launching projects in the Maldives, Florida, other places around the world. So we have fully indoor facilities. The one in the Bahamas is actually largely outdoor with sort of shade structure on top. We do have indoor laboratories and our pump house and all that kind of stuff. So there are indoor spaces, but that one is sort of a covered, enclosed, but actually outdoor facility largely.
And then sort of to dumb it down for me, then I take it somebody goes out diving in a coral reef and collects some coral, some living coral, and then brings it back ashore to your facility. And then you create these micro fragments, I think you call them, that you sort of break it up strategically, and then you call those polyps. Is that right?
So the polyps are sort of at the beginning, each like the little dots in each of the corals. That's the sort of the animal, and then it makes clones of itself for the large part. So we go out into the reefs. You got a pretty good summary of it. We'll take cuttings from living corals. Again, for those who are more familiar in the sort of the plant world or gardening, it's like you take a cutting off of a tree or a flower. We'll bring that back to our farms, and then we will grow them for 6, 12, 24 months, depending on the species and the genotype. We'll put them onto those little plugs, or eventually coral cookies, as we call them, which are these sort of like kind of quasi dome structures. What we're doing is using microfragmenting, as corals have a natural healing process, kind of like scar tissue. So if you take this original piece of coral, again, all those polyps are genetic copies of each other, the clones. You put those into, or you cut them up into little microfragments, and you put them on plugs or cookies and put them near each other. It triggers a healing process, and they will fuse back into themselves. And through the plug and the cookie, we're basically creating the limestone-ish skeleton for them. So they put all of their energy into growing the living tissue, so that we can grow, a brain coral or a star coral. These corals that from the size of your thumb to your hand and wrist could take 20, 50, 75 years. We're now growing them to that size, but in 6, 12, 24 months. So grow them there. Then in the aquaculture parks, again, instead of growing them out in the ocean where you're subject to whatever the ocean throws your way, we can modify the temperature, the salinity, the light, the flow rates. And so we like to sort of say we can give corals the spa treatment, or we can take them to the gym. So we can make it just the way they like it, to grow fast or to reproduce. We do that kind of coral spawning work I talked about before. Or we can also look at projections for future ocean temperatures, raise the temperatures in our tanks, bring them back down, stress harden all the corals we're growing, identify which parent colonies are naturally more resilient, go collect more of those from the reefs, because we have tech and all sorts of other cool stuff where we're tracking all of this and have an inventory going on. And then that lets us go out, and when we're doing the work, put more resilient corals back out onto the reefs as we restore them. And then and you go down with underwater drills and marine epoxy glue or cement, and you just plug them in, and the corals do their thing.
That's how you do it, right?
That's a very simplified version of it, yeah.
It sounds quite labor intensive.
It is, actually. That is definitely a space that is ripe for innovation. I mean, again, I love to dive. I'm not doing as much of that. I'm more in the business suit than the scuba suit these days up in New York. Yeah. But our teams are working hard, and it is definitely from the sort of surveys that you have to do to make sure it's even an appropriate site for restoration, to the outplanting, to the post-restoration monitoring and evaluating, how good of a job have we done. It is a lot of field work. So we ourselves and other people too are developing and putting new technologies into the field. There's, whether it's artificial intelligence for data tracking to tools for transport systems to move the corals faster underwater, to underwater GPS, to who knows what's going to come. But there is definitely an opportunity for how do we actually plant millions and billions of corals. We are going to need to do more than just divers and boats.
Yeah, interesting. And before we kind of come back to that, along the way you got awarded by Prince William as a part of the Earthshot initiative. And tell that story. That must have been pretty darn exciting.
It was, yeah. So Prince William, several years ago, announced that he was creating this big environmental award, the Earthshot Prize. And I remember when he announced it with David Attenborough. And I remember when they announced it, like, wow, it's cool, amazing concept. Maybe sometime in the future we'll be lucky enough to be considered or nominated for it. And we ended up winning it the very first year. So didn't have that on my bingo card. I'm incredibly grateful for that opportunity. Certainly was nice to win £1 million. There's 5 Earthshots. Great that it was pounds and not dollars. So we won the Revive Our Oceans Earthshot. There's one for Build a Waste-Free World, to protect and restore nature and fix our climate. And I'm now blanking out what the 5th one is, but it's sort of all these different elements of the planet. And so the idea is you could be a startup, you could be an early stage startup, you could be a Series D company, you could be a 14-year-old who has an idea for a solar-powered ironing cart in India, who's one of the finalists our first year, to a group of academics, to the city of Milan or the nation of Costa Rica. That's sort of like spanning the gamut, early stage, late stage, any sort of form. We all have an opportunity to, come up with ideas and solutions and put them into practice to try and deal with these things that really matter. So they still are very supportive of us. We won back in 2021. Did get to take William and Kate to plant corals in the Bahamas, which was a pretty fun day
Yeah.
office for our team.
Yeah.
And yeah, just using that platform that they have, I think, to really elevate not just our solution and these other solutions, but also, again, that they lend that to also the issue of coral reefs and the opportunities for restoration, I think, is a really powerful storytelling tool together with the physical support that they've given us through that prize.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you also were recognized by Forbes magazine, I think, for young entrepreneurs under 30 years old, doing great work. So congratulations on that. Let's talk about your business model now, because you touched on scaling. I touched on labor intensity. You're a for-profit, which is, like you said early off in the discussion, sort of a different way of approaching this. I know that somebody like myself can adopt a coral plant, I think it is, but what are the ways that the business model works? You mentioned you're working in all these countries, and who's paying for you to do this, and how do you pull it off?
So just a level set for everyone. Again, I mentioned this at the beginning, but tourism, coast protection, fisheries, those are some of the core values that Reefs provide. We have 3 pillars to the business: vertically integrated farms, licensing tech and expertise, and coral relocation. The last one is probably the most straightforward. When coastal development is happening, a hotel is getting built and there could be runoff, or a port is getting expanded or dredged. Corals are more often than not in harm's way. And more often than not, they suffer the consequences of that. So we can relocate corals from development impact zones, get hired to best protect their health. And we've seen really powerfully how much that matters and is still aligned with the mission of the business. We have a project in the Bahamas where a canal had been sedimented in and it was no longer navigable. They had to dredge it. And almost 4 years later, 98% of our corals have survived. Where a project done by a different organization several miles down the beach, within 3 months, maybe 30% of their corals survived. So the traditional sort of players in that space definitely don't put coral health as the priority, and we do. And so we try to use that, again, to protect corals, and also generate hopefully more business and get those actors to then also pay for additional restoration. The licensing tech and expertise, we've developed a proprietary system. It's called Brain Coral. It actually was recognized last year as one of Time's best inventions of the year. There's a range of hardware and software tools that are at play, but effectively we're able to track and analyze all of our corals from when we collect them, to fragment them, to stress test them, to outplant them, together with those sort of underwater tools and other things I mentioned a few minutes ago, in order to more effectively execute these projects and do it at a cheaper cost. Because labor intensity, if you're trying to track your entire coral farm with digital cameras and clipboards and Excel spreadsheets, and okay, well, which corals are healthiest or growing the fastest, which is data you need to collect, that is incredibly labor intensive. We now have tools where we can basically track and analyze all of that at one farm and call it an hour. So we use that internally. We also license that tech to other people doing coral restoration around the world, because it is, again, it's a global effort. And then the final piece, vertically integrated farms, like in the Bahamas, we have our own and sort of owned and operated facilities. We sell restoration as a service. So kind of playing on software as a service, is RaaS instead of SaaS. And we go to the hotels, developers, governments, insurance companies, port authorities, everyone who depends on those benefits that Reefs provide, that is a threat by reefs dying, can hire Coral Vita to restore them. We then also tap into these new conservation finance mechanisms that either exist or are proposed coming online. There are now coral restoration insurance policies, blue bonds, debt for nature swaps, the potential for biodiversity credits that can be layered on top of these, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. And then while we grow the corals to fulfill those contracts, the farms themselves are tourism attractions, as well as education centers for local communities. That's a core part of our model, is empowering locals through workforce development, through education and partnerships. But people pay to come visit our farms, like it's an aquarium. So we can sort of generate revenue on a daily basis. And then the last piece is, if you can't come to our farms, you love our work, people can go online and adopt a coral. And from the individual level to also sort of the brand and corporate nature positive companies that are for mission reasons, for legal reasons, marketing. We've restored a Corona Beer reef. We worked with Carryuma Shoes that did ocean themed sneakers, and that funded restoration. And Broken Planet, which is a streetwear company in the UK, we wouldn't sort of say, well, that's a core part of their business, but they believed in what we're doing. So they sponsored restoration work. So all those things come together to basically help pay for, the large scale restoration we need to keep reefs alive for the future.
That's awesome. Congratulations. And I take it, like you mentioned, it's a global effort, and you don't expect Coral Vita to be the one to be planting all those little corals, but you're enabling this whole process. Are you pretty optimistic? I mean, we started off with the bummer side of it, which is we've lost so much of this habitat, and it's so threatened even going forward. Are you optimistic now that there are viable solutions that we can turn this around?
I am. I'm also I describe myself as an optimistic realist.
Yeah.
It is going to get worse before it gets better. I'm not going to, beat around the bush on that. And I'll also be the best thing to do is not to hire Coral Vita or to restore reefs with anyone else. It's to stop killing reefs. We still need to solve for climate change and pollution and overfishing. And just like we need to stop deforestation, we also know at the same time reforestation works and matters. We need to stop killing reefs and scale reef restoration. And I mean, particularly when we're talking right now, to sort of pull this analogy out, but my dad back in the day used to work on trying to make peace in the Middle East. And you can't do that job if you're a pure idealist, right? It's going to blow up in your face. You need to respect thousands of year old histories and rivalries and tensions and all of these intricacies and nuances. But you also can't do that job if you're a cynic. If you don't believe peace is possible, how are you going to make it so? And so while we're going to see a lot of struggles moving forward, at the same time, every 1/10 of a degree we reduce matters. Every, polluting source we turn off matters. Every coral we outplant matters. And so even if that true impact is going to be seen, in generations to come, it's sort of that adage, if you plant a tree for your grandchildren to sit in the shade. I do believe we really can make a meaningful difference. And we can do what it takes to ensure coral reefs survive and thrive for generations to come.
Awesome. Thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for being on the podcast, Sam. It's great talking to you.
Same here.
That's it. Thanks for listening to Flanigan's EcoLogic. We'll see you next time.